Shadow over the Himalayas. The mountains rose high, like ancient titans guarding their secrets. Tall, stern, merciless. Emma, Peter, and Harry stood at the foot of the Himalayas, gazing into the distant horizon. The icy air cut to the bone, and the wind carried a ghostly whisper, as if the mountains themselves were warning of danger. "Damn it, this place looks not very welcoming," Harry muttered, shoving his hands deeper into his pockets. "Don't start," Peter waved him off. "We've traveled hundreds of miles to get here. This is our adventure." Emma remained silent. Something about this place filled her with an unexplainable sense of unease. The mild headache that had begun in the morning had now turned into an unpleasant pressure in her temples. She glanced back. It seemed as though someone was standing in the forest they had come from. But the moment she blinked, there was no one there. They moved upward. The further they climbed, the denser the mist swirled around them. The sunlight gradually faded, even though the day was supposed to last much longer. "This isn't normal," Peter murmured. "We've been walking for barely an hour, and the fog is already so thick I can hardly see your faces." Suddenly, Harry stopped. "Do you hear that?" Everyone froze. Somewhere in the distance, beyond the swirling mist, a strange sound echoed, something between a hoarse sigh and a distant wail. As if the wind itself had come alive and begun whispering ancient curses. "It's just the wind." Emma started, but her voice trembled. "No, it's something else," Harry whispered. A shadow darted between the trees. Quick, indistinct. And yet, it had the shape of a human figure. They could no longer ignore the unsettling feeling creeping over them. Something was watching them. And they were only at the beginning of their journey. The fog thickened like a living entity, wrapping around the trees and the narrow path they followed. The freezing wind pushed through the branches, creating an eerie rustling sound. Emma, Peter, and Harry moved forward, listening intently to every noise. "We need to find a place to rest," Peter said, brushing snowflakes off his jacket. "I really don't like this place," Emma whispered. "Nobody does," Harry sighed, pulling out his compass. But the needle spun wildly, as if it had lost its mind. "What the?" Harry smacked it with his hand. "It's not working." "That's impossible," Peter leaned in closer. "Compasses don't behave like this." They exchanged uneasy glances. Something was wrong. Something in this part of the mountains defied the laws of nature. And then, they heard it again. A whisper. Faint, drawn out, seeping in from everywhere, seemingly slipping straight into their minds. "Who's there?" Harry's voice was rough and sharp, but a note of fear trembled within it. No answer. Only the wind howling through the ravines. "We need to keep moving," Emma said, clutching her shoulders. "This place feels bad. Really bad." They quickened their pace, trying to shake off the creeping panic. But whatever it was following them. Suddenly, an old cabin appeared ahead. It leaned slightly, as if abandoned for decades. The windows were dark, the door ajar. "We can stay here for the night," Peter suggested. "Are you insane?" Emma stared at him in horror. "This place looks like something is living in it." "Or something used to," Harry muttered. But they had no choice. Night was falling fast, and the darkness here felt deeper than anywhere else. They stepped inside. And then, the door behind them slammed shut on its own. The darkness lurking within the cabin had them trapped now. The door slammed shut with a deafening bang, making all three of them recoil. Harry was the first to rush toward it, yanking at the handle. "They won't open," he rasped, trying to force them with his shoulder. Emma scanned the room. Inside, it was just as cold as outside, but the air carried a stale stench, mixed with something bitter and metallic, the smell of blood. "This place is bad," she whispered. The beam of Peter's flashlight swept across the walls. Peeling paint, broken furniture, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling like black lace. In the far corner stood a rocking chair. It was turned toward the wall. And it was moving. "Do you see that?" Harry whispered, pointing at the chair. It swayed rhythmically, slowly, as if someone had just risen from it. Who's there? Peter demanded sharply, directing the flashlight. The light hit the chair, and it stopped. Then, a sound. Footsteps. From above. All three of them froze. The footsteps were heavy, uneven, like someone moving with a limp. They creaked across the ceiling, slow, approaching. There's someone up there, Emma whispered. We need to get out of here, Harry said, his voice unsteady. Suddenly, the sound stopped. A suffocating silence. Peter lifted his head, shining the flashlight at the ceiling. And then it happened. A loud thud, as if something heavy had just dropped right above them. Then, a long, dragging scratch, like claws raking across the wooden planks. God! Harry stepped back. Look! Emma screamed, pointing at the ceiling. High above them, in the farthest corner, something, dark, was crouching. It hunched over, staring down. Two glowing eyes, like burning embers, deep and endless as the night sky. And then, it smiled. A sharp screech rang out, as if claws scraped against wood. The ceiling trembled, ready to collapse. Run! Peter yelled. They lunged for the door, struggling to break free, as something above let out a piercing hiss and leaped down. Darkness swallowed the room. And someone screamed. A scream tore through the darkness. Peter's flashlight slipped from his hands, rolling toward the wall. For a brief moment, its beam illuminated something horrific, long, gaunt arms with razor-sharp fingers clutching Harry. He screamed again, thrashing in the unseen grip of the shadows. Hold on! Peter shouted, grabbing his friend's arm. Harry writhed, his eyes wide with terror. The darkness around him pulsed, alive, as something unseen dragged him backward, into the abyss of the void. It's pulling me! His voice cracked into a desperate rasp. Emma lunged forward, gripping Harry's jacket. But her fingers slipped, the fabric was damp, sticky. Blood! Oh, God! Emma recoiled, seeing the dark liquid seeping from Harry's chest. A violent yank. Don't let me go, he screamed. But it was too late. Harry vanished into the darkness. His terrified screams echoed through the cabin for a few seconds longer, and then... silence. Thick, suffocating silence. Emma's breath came in ragged gasps, her hands trembling. Peter stood frozen, staring into the void where their friend had just been. We have to find him, he whispered, pulling a knife from his pocket. He's gone, Emma shook her head, her voice unsteady. Then, scratching. From the darkness. It's coming back. She whispered. Something was crawling across the floor. Slow. Soundless. Peter grabbed her hand. The window. They lunged for it, thinking of nothing else. Peter smashed the glass with his elbow, and they scrambled outside, slipping onto the frost-covered ground. The wind hit their faces, carrying with it the sting of snow, and a whisper. Emma. Peter. A voice drifted from the cabin. Harry's voice. But it was wrong. They didn't wait. They ran into the night. Behind them, in the darkness, something laughed. And it wasn't Harry. The icy wind slashed their faces, the snow stealing their breath. Emma and Peter ran, never looking back. They didn't know where they were going, only that they had to get as far away from that cursed cabin as possible. But they were not alone. Behind them came a sound. Scratching. At first, faint. Almost unnoticeable. Then louder. Whatever it was, it moved across the snow in a way no human would, jerking forward in uneven bursts, stopping suddenly, only to lunge again. Peter grabbed Emma's hand, yanking her behind a large boulder. Quiet! He whispered, barely breathing. Emma hugged herself, trying to control her trembling. She dared to glance back. And she saw it. A figure. It stood in the snow, hunched, blurred by the swirling frost. For a moment, the moonlight illuminated it. "Oh, God!" Emma nearly screamed. It was Harry. Or what used to be him. His body looked wrong. Twisted, like something had pulled him out of another world. His eyes, empty, hollow. No pupils. His head tilted slightly to one side, his skin an unnatural, pale grey. But the worst part was his smile. Too wide. Too wrong. "Peter, that's not him," Emma whispered, gripping his arm. "I know." Peter's voice cracked. Harry stood still, head tilted, watching them. And then, he spoke. "Emma." "Peter, where are you going?" His voice was almost normal. Almost. But something was off. Something broken. And then, he moved. Not just stepped forward, he lunged. "Run!" Peter screamed, pulling Emma with him. They tore down the slope, slipping on the snow, grabbing at branches for balance. Behind them, Harry followed. He was too fast. Too fast for a human. Suddenly, a ravine loomed ahead. "Peter, stop!" Emma screamed. Too late. Peter couldn't stop in time. He skidded on the ice. And vanished over the edge. His scream echoed through the night, then silence. Emma dropped to her knees, gasping for breath. She peered over the ledge. Nothing. No movement. No sound. "Peter." Her voice broke into a whisper. A breath. Heavy. "Close." She turned. Harry stood inches away. His grotesque smile stretched even wider. "You're all alone now," he whispered. And his eyes. They began to glow. Emma couldn't move. Her body was frozen with terror, her heart pounding so loudly it felt as if even the darkness around her could hear it. Harry stood before her, his form trembling, as though it wasn't accustomed to holding this shape. His eyes, black voids with a dim, unnatural glow deep within, locked onto hers. "You're all alone now," it whispered. Its voice was raspy, strained, as if spoken through shattered vocal cords. Emma took a step back, but her legs trembled. Behind her, the sheer cliff. In front of her, it. "This isn't you," she whispered, fighting back tears. Harry tilted its head. Its face twitched, as if something inside it was struggling to maintain its human form. "Why do you run?" It stepped forward. And that's when Emma saw it. The shadow. Distorted. Warped. Shifting behind it. But it wasn't his shadow. It moved differently. It lived separately. "You are it," Emma whispered. The thing inside Harry's body froze. As if something inside had suddenly realized. And then, it smiled. Wider. Yes. It lunged forward. Emma screamed and bolted down the slope. The wind tore at her face, the snow blinded her, but she ran, without thinking, without stopping. Behind her, the same sickening scratching noise. It was following. She couldn't run forever. Her legs weakened, her breath ragged. Her heart pounded like it was ready to burst. Then, she saw it. An old, ruined structure standing alone in the vast snowy plateau. There. She wheezed. She stumbled toward the door, collapsing at the entrance, barely able to keep herself upright. With the last of her strength, she forced herself inside. Inside, there was silence. But she knew. This wasn't over. Something was waiting for her here. The darkness inside the building was thick, like ink. Emma pressed herself against the wall, struggling to steady her breath. Her chest heaved, each inhale a battle. Outside, the scratching continued. It hadn't left. She cautiously glanced around. Rotting wooden beams. broken furniture, and a mirror. Large, cracked, standing in the corner. Something was wrong with it. She stepped closer and froze. Her reflection was there. But behind her, Peter. Alive. His eyes wide, his hands covered in blood, his breath ragged. "Peter," she whispered. He didn't answer. But his reflection smiled. No. That wasn't him. Emma recoiled from the mirror. This is a trap. Peter's reflection grinned wider. His head twitched, then snapped violently to the side. A sickening crack. And then the door creaked open. A blast of icy wind rushed in. And it entered. What had once worn Harry's body was now worse. It no longer bothered to pretend. Its arms had lengthened, its skin was ashen grey, stretched too thin. Its eyes burned with a dim, sickly yellow glow. Its grin reached its ears. "You've come home," it whispered. Emma stepped back. She knew. This was the end. Behind her, the mirror. In front of her, it. No escape. She felt something slither beneath her skin. And then, it took its final step. Emma felt the cold seep inside her, gripping every nerve in her body. She stood trapped between the mirror and the thing that was no longer Harry. The creature's glowing eyes burned in the darkness, its voice a whisper like wind slithering over gravestones. "You belong to us." Then, a sound. Behind her. The mirror. It no longer reflected reality. Inside it was another room. Dark walls. Something shifting in the corners. And the most terrifying part, neither she nor the creature were in the reflection. It didn't reflect this world. But it was an exit. Emma knew, if she stayed here, she would never escape. She stepped back. The creature's eyes widened. No. It lunged. Emma spun and leapt into the mirror. The world erupted into darkness. Silence. When she opened her eyes, everything was different. She was lying in bed. At home. Sunlight filtered through the curtains. The room was warm. Familiar. It was just a dream? Her voice cracked. She sat up slowly, pain lingering in every muscle. Her heart still pounded violently. Then, she saw it. In the mirror. Behind her. Two figures. Harry and Peter. They were smiling. And then, Harry slowly tilted his head to the side. "You came back, but not alone." Emma screamed. Darkness never lets go.